And October 14th, I was in a head-on collision and I walked away basically unscathed. A lady kind of T-boned me. I hit the windshield and I walked away with a sliver of glass in my head. And then at that point, I was like, the universe is telling me something. You got to change.
Who I need to be, coming from the heart, coming from the heart.
Hey, MOMnation. Welcome to our From the Heart podcast, where we share inspirational stories, useful information, and we discuss a wide variety of women-related topics. While you're listening to this episode on your favorite podcast platform, please subscribe to our channel and rate us so that we can get this information out to the moms that need to hear it. If you'd like to join the conversation, we are at MOMnation USA. That's our handle on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hey, Mom Nation, we're back again with another episode of From the Heart, where we share inspirational stories, useful information, and we discuss a wide variety of women-related topics. Please give us a like and follow. We are on YouTube. Our handle is at MOMnationAZ, or you can look up MOMnation Talk Radio on your favorite podcast channel. I'm Katie, the founder of MOMnation, and I would like to introduce my very lovely co-founder and co-host, Sherry. How's it going, Cher?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. It's been a minute since I've seen you.
I know I wasn't on last time, so I'm glad to be here today with you today.
Yeah, always love having you on. I love your perspective. I love all that you've lived, right? Because we've both lived a lot of life. We're not going to give our ages away exactly, but we've all lived a lot of life. And so it's nice to have your perspective on here. So yes, welcome back. Happy to see you. And then we have our guest for today, the beautiful Alle. And your last name, Parmenter? Did I say that right?
Parmenter. Correct.
Hey, I'm doing pretty good today.
Good job.
Yeah. And we have Alle on. We're going to talk through some pretty powerful stuff, guys. There was, if you're not familiar, we all met in this group called MOMnation, and it's on Facebook. We have a website too, MOMnationUSA.com. And we are in the Arizona group together, the three of us. And so there's a couple of other states, but we're in the Arizona group. And a couple of days ago in the Arizona group, there was a post that Alle had responded to. And this is where Alle and I kind of started talking. And the post, Alle, if you remember, was about overcoming a toxic relationship and kind of like, if you knew then what you knew now, like, you know, what got you through that, basically, I think is what the gist of the post was.
Yeah.
And
So
your answer was pretty phenomenal. So I'm sorry, I'm a cutter offer. Just ask anybody who does a show with me. They're like, she's interrupting Katie. Watch out.
No,
so I
it's
apologize
okay.
for that. But your response, and I'll let you kind of go into it without interrupting you, but your response really, really grabbed me. And so hence the reason for asking you to be on the show. So I'm really excited to hear about your story, kind of how you grew, how you got to where you are now in a healthy space.
So I grew up with addicts and narcissists. I am a survivor of sexual abuse, familial sexual abuse, throughout the family. My sister was also the same, and it's kind of been an interesting ride. So I've been pretty much taking care of myself since I was 6, cooking my own food, kind of watching taking care of my own self, basically. My mother was definitely a very big gaslighter, a very big narcissist. She had great redeeming qualities. She was a good friend, but she wasn't a good mother. So there's a lot of things that I didn't learn growing up and how to be in a healthy relationship or even be healthy to myself. I was talking to my son's girlfriend and she was shocked to learn that I don't know how to put makeup on. She was shocked to learn that I didn't know anything about feminine hygiene when I started my period. I didn't know these things. I had to ask around or I had to just guess. And so I grew up pretty fast, pretty hard. I My mother was the first person to introduce me to drugs. She handed me a joint when I was 13 and was like, "Here you go." Um, it, yeah, it's been interesting. Um, there was just a lot of abuse, verbal and mental and psychological warfare, growing up, and even up until she passed. So I think I was about 30 when she passed, and I was in a extremely toxic relationship then. Um, it was physically violent. He was an addict. He was a gaslighter. He was, I mean, everything. Nobody's going to love you. You know, you're disgusting. And at that point, at that point in my time, after having heard things like, "Oh, you're fat, you're disgusting, you're this, that, or the other," and I was like, "What are you going to tell me that nobody else in my life has ever told me?"
So these are things she would say to you also?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
you would be so pretty if you lost a little bit of weight, or you're fat. What are you going to do? Or and there's things that my sister had said to me, previously. So it was something that I'd never not heard before. It was normal, and I think I at one point told him I'd rather you physically harm me than call me names or mentally abuse me, because I can heal physically, but the mental abuse you can't heal from, right? And it takes time. Um, so to backtrack a little bit, I moved from New Mexico to Arizona when I was 17, um, and kind of got into using drugs and fell in with the absolute wrong crowd and was homeless at some point. Um, Met my ex-husband, my oldest son's father, um, and that was a super toxic relationship on both sides. Uh, we didn't know how to be in a relationship. I was 20 when I had my son, so I wasn't even old enough to drink. So I've been a mother for the last 22 years of my life, um, and we would fight all the time. It was physical. There was name calling. It was just bad. And we finally divorced, and so we split up, and I started using again for about 2 years, and then I got clean. And then we tried to work out the marriage, for the sake of our oldest son, and it was oil and water. It was just not, it was not healthy for our son. And so we divorced, and I immediately went into a relationship with someone who I thought was what I wanted. Um, he was in the beginning, he was very generous. He was very like giving and complimented me and things like that. And then as his drug usage got worse, the abuse got worse. Um, you know, Nobody's going to like you. Nobody's going to want to be with you. You're used goods. You're just a barrage of mental abuse. And then there was a point where he had actually held a knife to my throat and threatened to kill my son in front of me while I watched. And he got arrested, and I wrote a victim impact statement, and I took him back. And then probably about 6 or 7 months later, I was like, "I'm done. I cheated on you. I'm done." That was the only way that I knew how to get him out of my life, was to be toxic, right? Toxic right back to him. Give him what he's given to me. Um, and I kicked him out, and I started to use again. Um, and I was self-medicating for many different reasons. And I started to use again. I was working 3 jobs. I was trying to take care of my son. He was, wow, he was like 10 or 11 at the time. So this was like 2010, 2011. And one day we sat down at breakfast and I realized that my son had grown up in front of me and I didn't recognize him. You know, he went from me having to order his breakfast for him as this tiny boy to him saying, you know, I would like XYZ when the waitress came. And I kind of had a reality check. I continued using October 12th, 2011 is when I stopped. I just said, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I don't know what to do. But I'm done. And October 14th, I was in a head-on collision and I walked away basically unscathed. A lady kind of T-boned me. I hit the windshield and I walked away with a sliver of glass in my head. And then at that point, I was like, the universe is telling me something. You got to change. And so I did the only thing at the time that I knew to do because I couldn't turn to my sister. I had no infrastructure. I had no family. I had no friends. I'd pushed them all away from using. And I signed over custody of my son to his dad. And I said, hey, I got to go away for a while. So I drove cross country to Tennessee and I reconnected with my dad. And that in itself is a whole nother story. They come from a very dysfunctional military family. So it was definitely interesting.
Yeah, I bet.
It was, we found out later at some point that my father had molested his two younger sisters, which, you know, he never touched us when he was around. He was in and out of jail. So he never touched me or my sister. But then, you know, finding that information out about this man that you idolized because he was the only man that had ever protected me, it was detrimental. And so I was there for about 6 months and I came back and I had my son every weekend and I struggled to get on my feet. I struggled to keep a job. I just struggled mentally. And I think it was about 2012, like late 2012, when I had finally been able to get into a situation that was healthy for me and stay with a job, that I started to notice that I was presenting toxic traits to the people in my life. I was like, you know, when they say people are overthinkers and they sit there, people with ADD or ADHD, they sit and they like go through every conversation that they've ever had in their entire life. Well, I do that. And it was a good thing and a bad thing. I was able to go through the conversations that I'd had in that last 12 or 13 years and say, holy cow, you were toxic. You couldn't communicate. You were volatile. You were, you know, violent with your ex-husband. You know, hit him back when he hit you. And things just kind of took a very sharp turn at that point. I started to do a lot of self-reflection. I started to write more, you know, and I wrote my story out, and it was featured on a website, Gringo Bill, who used to be the guitarist for Authority Zero.
Oh.
Yeah, and I was one of the writers on there, and so I wrote my story out about addiction from beginning to end, you know, and how I started to recognize my traits, and that kind of helped me. It was very cathartic to write stuff out. But one of the other things I did is I started to observe people a little bit more. Friends, I started to just people watch. And then I started to get curious, like, okay, do I behave like that? Like, have I said those things? And then I started to hold myself accountable. to myself. So like it wouldn't like, going to AA or NA and like, making apologies as far as any of the steps. It was holding myself accountable, forgiving myself for the things that I had done. And I still struggle with that today because it's still very much, there's still a lot of things that I did as a kid, and even, and I say kid, I mean from 15 to 20, that people wouldn't, like, you would look at me and be like, wow, you're a scumbag for the things that you did, and it's true, I was. And so I took years to work on myself. I changed my daily habits. I focused on verbalizing what I needed to say and communicating what I needed to say to somebody. I would say things to myself, like, hey, you've lived a hard life. You've gone through these things. It's okay to feel the way that you're feeling, but you can't live there. And I think during my journey into sobriety, there was a gentleman who used to own a restaurant in Tennessee, and he gave me two pieces of advice. He's like, you've got to change your playground, your playmates, and your playthings in order to remove yourself from addiction, right? And remove yourself from behaviors. Absolutely. And it rang so true, because you can't go back to the same playground expecting different playmates and and be in the same playground or the same sandbox that you're trying to get out of, right? Because it'll just drag you down. And the other piece of advice was, watch how you speak to yourself in that moment. And I started to realize, like, oh, well, I'm very unkind to myself, right? I am fat. I am unhealthy. I am a horrible person. All of these things that people have told me over the course of my life, those things started to become true in my life. And so I had to take a step back and I had to observe my behaviors, and I changed it with my son. I started with my son. I apologized to him for having to give him, full custody to his dad. I started with changing the way that I behaved with him, because he was the closest thing to me. I cut contact with my sister. I love her dearly, but there are some things that, she is a narcissist, and I don't know if she understands that or if she realizes it, but she is. And so I had to take a step back, and I started with my son, and I was like, all right, well, we're going to communicate now. We're not going to yell at you. I'm not going to yell at you. You need to tell me what's going on. You need to use your words, no matter how long it takes you to tell me what's going on. So communication for me was the first step, right? That was a very clear boundary, is you can't yell at me. You can't scream at you. You can't talk to me that way. You have to use your words. And so our relationship progressed. One of the other things too is that I basically was like, I want no relationships. I don't want to be with anybody. I will be friends with you. I'll keep you at arm's length. I will, whatnot, but I didn't want any relationships, because how could I be in a healthy relationship, even with a partner or a friendship, when I could not even be friends with myself? Because at that point, I was 30, 34. I didn't like myself. 32, 33, sorry. I didn't like myself. I didn't like who I had become. I didn't like the fact that I had allowed two men in my life to verbally and physically abuse me, on top of the abuse that I received from, my mom and my sister previously. And so it got to the point where I was just like, I'm focusing on my son. I'm focusing on my job. I'm focusing on getting myself back together. one of the things that I did is I started reading The Art of War by Sun Tzu once a month. I would just read it, and it would be like how to, your internal battles. How can I apply those concepts to my everyday life? And another book was A Million Little Pieces, which, I guess they proved at some point that the guy was not actually in rehab, but it gave me some inspiration. It helped me kind of get to the next step. But The Art of War is something that I gave a copy to my son. I carry a copy with me. I started to implement a lot of the battle plans, I guess you could say, into my daily life. How to focus on, know your enemy's next move before they know their next move, sort of thing. Well, I was my own enemy, so I had to be one step ahead of myself, which can get really exhausting.
Yeah.
It's very exhausting. And then, I got properly diagnosed with ADHD. And I got on the appropriate medications to help me kind of refocus everything. And I realized that I was self-medicating with, I used meth. And when I tell people that, they're like, oh my God, you have such great teeth. And I was like, well, yeah, just because you use doesn't mean you stop taking care of yourself, right? Most people do, but I didn't. I still had to work and take care of myself. And I was a closet addict.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to kind of see the toxic traits. And I swore that I wouldn't be in a relationship, and I didn't want anything from anybody. And I started to heal. I started to heal from the trauma as a child. I started to heal from the verbal and the physical abuse. I started to heal myself. I became more in tune with who I am as a person. And I did a lot more self-audit, right? I did a lot more self-audit. Okay, so what was the last conversations that you had in the 24 hours? Oh, well, I lost my cool at somebody. All right, what can you do better? Let's course correct that. When a situation comes up when you're angry, what can you change? And it's sometimes I slip. Even now, I struggle with it sometimes because along the way there were other things that were, diagnosed. I had an eating disorder. I would binge eat. I had generalized anxiety. So my behavior, my irrational behavior wasn't from like bipolar disorder, which they told me at one point in time it was actually from anxiety. So my anxiety was creating this scenario in my head, and I was responding negatively to the scenario in my head that wasn't actually a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was imaginary.
And I have ADHD in our family too, and so I totally understand it. And over the last couple of years, have gotten quite a bit of experience and learned and things like that. And high anxiety is definitely something that ADHD folks deal with. And then your emotions are, I think the statistic is 4 times that of neurotypical. And so, being a child, going through what you went through, having ADHD and feeling those extra emotions and the extra anxiety on top of the things that were happening to you that shouldn't have been happening to any adult either,
right?
But
right.
any child by any means.
Yeah, and it was a struggle, right? And it still is a struggle. I got my own place, and for me that was such a big accomplishment. I had this list that I had written down in Tennessee, and it was on this ratty piece of paper, and it had been folded multiple times and like in my wallet. And I had this list, and it was, get custody of my son, get a place of my own, get my driver's license back. So I hadn't had my driver's license ever. up until I was 34. So I had been driving illegally from the time that I was 14 to 34. So for 20 years, I drove illegally because how was I going to get to work? How was I going to get my kid to daycare? How was I going to do these things? And I took the bus for a very long time. And I got my driver's license back. I got custody of my son back. He lived with me full time. It was week on, week off. 50-50 custody. I started to change my behaviors, and I started to fix the things that I had been previously told were wrong with me. So I course corrected, right? And even, like I said, even now, sometimes I go off road a little bit. And my husband, bless his heart, is very patient, and he calls me out. He helps me own my stuff, and I bounce things off him. I'm like, hey, so did I actually say that to you? And he's like, yeah, you did. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. And he's like, it's okay. He's like, I knew you'd figure it out. But it's a self audit every day. And it doesn't give me anxiety to self audit anymore. It gives me an opportunity for that 30 minutes before I actually fall asleep and in the quiet, to think, what did I do today that could be negative? What did I do today that had a negative impact on somebody else? And how can I make tomorrow different? One of the things that I also learned, and I'm not sure where the quote comes from, but every day is a new beginning, right? With no mistakes. So you start every day as a new beginning. Every day is fresh. It's like a whiteboard. You wipe it all off at midnight, and when you wake up in the morning, it's clear, and you do your priority list or your task list or what you want to accomplish in that day, and write down the negative and the positive. And so that's part of how I started to course correct. I met my husband by chance. He came over for dinner, and I knew that he was the one that I was going to marry, even though previously I said I'm never going to be in a relationship. I'm never going to marry anybody again. I don't want to be in a relationship. I knew he was going to be the one that I married. And just about, I want to say maybe 10 months later, we were married. And then 3 months after that, we had our son on October 12th, on the day that I got sober 4 years prior.
Wow.
Yeah. And he was a miracle baby. He was a miracle baby. I was told, because of my drug use, because of, I have PCOS, I had endometriosis, I had scarred ovaries. I was a body full of not only internal physical injuries, but like mental injuries and everything, that I would never have kids. And he was there at the doctor's appointment, and the doctor even said, hey, I'm sorry, you're infertile. You're never going to have kids. And 16 weeks later, we found out I was pregnant.
Wow.
Yeah. And had my son on October 12th, the day that I stopped using.
That's incredible.
Around them.
What's that, say again, Cher?
That was a beautiful way that the universe kind of paid it forward and gave you a blessing.
Yeah. It was probably the best gift that I had ever been given, outside of, my first son was definitely a gift as well, but for the universe to say, hey, good job at fixing, and understanding and recognizing the issues that you're having. But yeah, it was definitely a great gift. Say that again? I'm sorry.
That just gave me the chills. It's never too late, to change and have positive things in your life, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And I love what you were saying about, doing your self audits. And it sounded like to me you were looking for trigger points. So, okay,
yes,
what in that circumstance, when I snapped at that person or when I said something I shouldn't have said, like, what was my trigger point right there? And
yes,
I feel like we kind of go through life and we don't necessarily pay attention to those trigger points. And so you don't know, right? But once
Right.
you start paying attention to those trigger points, then you can start working on, well, okay, now what created that trigger?
Yep.
And so that's kind of like what you're meaning when you suggest doing a self audit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You react a certain way to certain situations. And people who are neurotypical or neurodivergent, I'm sorry, they act a certain way to certain things. I used to have a very strong physical reaction to the word moist, and 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 most people do. Most people do, and I think it was a couple years ago that I just sat in bed and I just said the word over and over and over again until it stopped hurting, until the physical reaction was no longer there. And I'm like, it is just a word.
Mm-hmm.
It holds no power. And my husband now, he follows stoicism, and even at the time, I've shared posts on Facebook about stoicism and things like that. But he follows stoicism, and he's like, you give things power and control over your life that you really shouldn't. Like, this person holds no power over your life. You don't need to give a reaction to said person. You don't need to give a reaction to said incident. Like,
Right.
it doesn't immediately affect you. And have you guys ever worked with like the Venn diagrams, where they overlap and like this is your control and that kind of thing?
I think I've seen that before. Yeah.
Okay. So I also learned that in my circle, this is my circle. This is what's in my control. How I react, what I say, how I behave, what I do. And those are all very separate things, right? My face holds my emotion. When I am displeased, it shows. When I'm happy, it shows. It I can't hide my face. So when somebody says something, I have to control how I react to that, right? Good
Mm-hmm.
news, bad news. I'm like, okay, like let's, think about this for a minute. What I say, let's think about what you say before you say it. It's the whole, is it kind? Is it helpful? Is it purposeful? Like, does it matter, sort of thing. And so I started doing that. And we've had some rocky instances in our relationship, but my husband has helped me heal from the previous abuse. And not just because he's been a sounding board, right? He's somebody that I can trust with my secrets or my words, and he'll tell me, yeah, that probably wasn't right. You should have, maybe think about how you reacted or how you responded.
Mm-hmm.
Or hey, I don't think that was appropriate. So I don't put the onus on him to call me out, but sometimes I don't think about those things. Being, neurodivergent, I don't think about those things because I just say what comes to my mind, and it's
Yep.
verbal diarrhea. And then you're like, I
Whoops.
can't believe I just said that.
Right.
And you pull your shirt up and you're like, okay, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Erase, erase,
And
erase.
yeah, you're like, delete. I can't fix this. Where's the whiteout? Um, and it becomes harder and harder to. I'm realizing as I get older, it becomes harder and harder to keep my mouth from just opening and saying things.
Mm-hmm.
So now I kind of just, this is what I'll do. Before I say anything, I'm covering my mouth, because I'm like, all right, if I physically cover my mouth, I can't speak, right? But back to the Venn diagram. It's sorry, I digress.
That's okay.
It's what's in your control, right? And then it's what you have influence over, and what you have no control over, right? I have no control over other people's reactions or responses or emotions or what they do in their day to day.
That's giant. And I just want to hit on that for just a second. And I'm sorry to
Yes.
interrupt you, but that is so
No.
giant, because how many of us walk through life thinking that we do control other people's emotions, thinking that what we say and do causes them to feel a certain way? Actually,
Yes.
not true. And
Yeah.
once we start realizing that it's not true, no, they cause themselves to feel a certain way and act a certain way, then we kind of like it's a weight off your shoulders, right?
Yes. And I have dumped that garbage, is that's what I call it. I dump that garbage. I delete those files. I can't control how somebody's going to react over here. I can control how I react to their reaction, right? I can get mad. I can call them out on it, or I can just be like, you know what? I'm done. I'm going to put you here, and I'm not going to deal with this, right? I have very clear boundaries, and it's been really hard because I've flip-flopped through my relationship with my sister. I've flip-flopped through my relationship with one of my very absolute best friends. And we just celebrated our 1-year anniversary the other day, my friend and I, without having a fight or an argument. Because it would be like we would fight and argue, and then we wouldn't talk to each other for 6 months, and then I'd be like, I really miss my best friend. I miss this person who could vent to me and I could vent to them, and I miss this person. And we've kind of both grown up, and she didn't realize the stress that I was going through at the time when we stopped talking a couple of years ago. And I didn't realize the stress that she was going through at the time, right? It's that self-audit. Be aware of what people are going through. Be aware of what you're going through. Are you, what's the term I'm looking for? Are you projecting your issues onto other people and saying, oh, well, we'll use you as an example, Katie. Well, I'm really pissed off at Katie because she didn't do the dishes. Well, you did the dishes, but I didn't do the dishes. But I'm projecting those feelings onto you because I want to blame you, right? I want to blame you for something that I'm at fault for. Am I allowed to curse on here?
Yeah. Okay.
So one of the things that I even tell my oldest son is I was like, if you fuck up, you own it. You own it. And you own it 100%. And I tell both of my boys that. My oldest son made some very poor decisions, and he came straight to me and he's like, Mom, I did XYZ. And I was like, okay, did you own it? And he goes, I absolutely did. I said, did you take it any further than it needed to go? And he goes, no. I said, but you owned it, right? You admitted your mistake and it's not going to happen again. And he goes, absolutely. And at that moment I was like, oh, that's a pivot point. I actually raised a good human.
Yeah.
Which, you have kids. Parenting is hard. It's hard to stop that
cycle
of trauma. Because you don't want to be like your parents. You don't want to, your trauma is not your kid's responsibility.
Exactly.
Sorry. And I look at my sons and I had a big pivot, a monumental moment a couple weeks ago with my oldest son, and we were driving, and I said, I'm really sorry that I didn't have this parenting skills that I have today when you were little. I really fucked you up. I'm really sorry. Nobody in my life has ever apologized to me, an adult, for saying, hey man, like, we really fucked you up. Like, we really screwed the pooch on this one. Like, and I apologized to him. Because I felt in my heart that it was, I didn't do right by him. And he goes, Mom, I forgive you. He goes, but don't do that with my brother. And he goes, I see how you are with my brother. And he goes, you're doing a good job. And to hear that from the oldest about to the little, I'm like, oh my God.
Oh, that is amazing. But
Yes.
good for you for like coming to the table with him and being vulnerable and saying, hey, yo, my bad.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I have some similar things that have happened in my childhood as you. And, you know, my caregivers were just like, well, did the best we could with what we had.
Yeah.
For real? That's your answer to me?
Well, actually, still to this day, they won't own it.
Right.
You know, or they place that blame back on you. Allie, like I don't know you, but a lot of things that you just shared really hit home for me too. And I just want to say I'm really proud of you. But also it gives me hope for me and my kids too. Because I wasn't the mom I am today with my oldest. And to hear you talk about your son, your oldest son, and how he is, like, it gives me hope, you know. Like, I sometimes get in that mindset of thinking, like, dang, I already messed her up, you know, and she's too old and it's too late, but it's not.
Yeah.
No, it's never. I want to give you a hug. I'm sorry.
No.
It's not too late. It really isn't. I think that as parents, being a parent is probably the best thing in the world, right? I can't have kids anymore. I tell my husband that he and my son broke the bank. He broke the uterus. They salted the earth. They took it all out. But being a parent is fluid, right? It doesn't matter how old your kid is. Had my mom come to me before she died and apologized for taking me back to the same house that my sister was assaulted in, I would have forgiven her. She didn't. It happened to my sister for so many years, and then it happened to me. My mom took me back into that same situation, knowing that there was a predator there. And being a mom is so much more than, I'm not going to be like my mom, or I'm not going to do the things that my parents did, because sometimes you end up being that way, right? It's fluid. It is ever changing. It is never too late to apologize to your kids, like, ever. You know, it is never too late to change your behaviors, your habits. Again, it all kind of comes around to that self audit and course correct. And maybe it would give you anxiety to sit for 30 minutes in silence and think about your conversations for that day, or how you responded to your children, or how you responded to your partner or your coworkers, or the person at Starbucks, right? And as a mom, what you did wrong that day. It's not easy being a parent. It's not easy being a parent at 42 with a 6-year-old. You know, it's tiring, it's exhausting. But you have that ability. It's fluid, and you didn't mess up your older children, and it's never too late to apologize. You could be 85 on your deathbed and be like, look, I am sorry. But as long as you own your mistakes, as with them growing up, it makes all the difference in the world. An apology, a sincere apology, and changed behavior makes all the difference in the world. And I think that as women, or as moms, we lack that empathy for ourselves.
Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah.
We're so hard on ourselves. Our kids got a C. Well, you know what? C's get degrees. As my mother-in-law says, C's get degrees. And I've not been the best person to certain people in my life in the last couple of years, because I just don't tolerate people. I just don't. I don't tolerate nasty behavior. I don't tolerate rudeness. And prior to that, they call it fawning. I would just be like, oh, that's okay. Like, no worries. Like, you can treat me like shit. it's totally okay. I'll still be here. No, I don't. And it's pushed people away, and that's fine because they don't need to be in my life at all.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely not.
That's you setting boundaries and sticking to them.
yes,
Mhm.
that's me setting boundaries and sticking to them. Absolutely.
Yeah, and something that one of the shows that we do here on the MOMnation Talk Radio channel is called Q&A with a couples counselor, and it's called Our Love Story. It's a very big, long title, and it's with Diana Eisel. She's on. It's she and I every month, and one thing that she says that will stick with me forever, ever, and ever and ever, that I think is so 100% true, is those that are the loudest or push against the hardest when you create boundaries are the
Yep.
ones that were benefiting the most from them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, like, let that sink in for a minute.
Yeah.
And once you start creating those boundaries, or maybe you already have, or, you know, whatever the case may be, y'all out there, pay attention to how people react to that,
Yes.
because
Pay
you
attention
don't need that in your life.
No. Pay attention to how people react to when you say no,
Mm.
or when you are like, no, I'm going to take some time for myself. You know, there are people who always have to be in the action or in it. And I've been called dramatic. I've been told that I like to stir drama. I don't. I actually, like, drama just attaches itself to me because I'm an empath. I feel everybody's feelings and everybody's emotions, and I know when the room changes. But in researching, I discovered that people who are empaths have had abusive home lives,
Yeah.
and that they learn to read the room. They learn to see the slightest change in people's emotions,
Because
and
it's
then
survival.
it's survival.
Mhm.
And you know, again, the self inventory and self assess and course correct and stoicism, it all wraps up into one. Don't let people rent space in your head. Don't let them live there for free. Don't, you know, it's outside of your control. Change your actions and your behaviors, because it's never too late to do that, right? Never too late to do that. And every day is definitely a fresh start. And with my 6-year-old, we're now teaching him that, you know, if we have to work from home and he can't be here in the afternoon, I'm like, hey man, this is outside of your control. Mom and dad have meetings. It's part of our job. You have to go to the babysitter. You know, if you behave XYZ, you don't get ABC. And so it's, instead of, sometimes we lose patience, and that's okay. We don't call names. We don't. My husband and I don't fight in front of our son. We actually don't really fight at all. We have disagreements, but then I'm just like, get out of my car. I'm done. Get out of my car.
Talk about this later.
Yeah, we'll talk about this later. I'm not even going to do this with you. And he does the same thing to me. He's like, okay, I'm putting in my book now, and he'll go off and do something, and then we'll come back, and I'll be like, all right, so was I a jerk? And he's like, yeah, you were. Or, and I'm like, I'll look at him and I'll be like, are you better now? And he's like, yeah, I'm sorry. It's never too late.
But I
And
like that, because why create more? I know we're getting a little close to time here. We could probably talk forever, but
Mhm.
why create more conflict, more friction, right?
yes,
I love that you kind of, okay, recognize the trigger. I'm gonna back away now, because we all have those days, you know,
yes.
like when I'm PMSing it, I'm PMSing it. When I'm stressed out, like I'm stressed out. When I have a lot of clients to deal with, and my 8-year-old, I'm 43 with an 8-year-old, by the way, so I get it. You know,
Oh,
my
yeah.
8-year-old
Okay,
just like wants everything at that moment. And so I
now.
think giving ourselves a little bit of grace, obviously we don't, you know, want to promote or act in a way that's not healthy, of course, but giving yourself a little bit of grace if that happens to happen. But if you catch it, right?
Yes.
You catch that trigger and you're like, okay, I'm about to go and down a road we don't want to go down. So get out of my car.
Yes.
You
Get out of my
know?
car.
Yeah.
And Yeah, absolutely. And there's been times that I have snapped at my son, and my son he is a true empath. He doesn't have a toxic home in my littlest. He doesn't have a toxic home environment, but he knows when somebody needs a hug. He knows when somebody needs a smile. He'll walk up to women and be like, "You're so beautiful," or "I really love you," or he is the light of everybody's life that meets him. And I don't say that because he's my kid, but I say that because he really actually is. Um, and I've snapped at him, and I was like, "Hey, buddy, I'm really sorry. I did not mean to snap at you. Mommy was really tired. Mommy's really stressed. Mommy doesn't feel good. Um, and I'm really, really sorry. I won't do it again." And he goes, "I understand. Thank you for apologizing. I forgive you." And like literally, he's 6 years old and that mature in his head. And I'm just like, who is this kid? You know? But it's because we show him what healthy relationships are about. We show him that we're fixing ourselves. And my husband's had trauma in his life, and we don't bring our trauma to the table when we eat at night. We don't bring our trauma to our child. Because it's not their fault. And so circling all the way back to the beginning of the toxic relationship, right? Some women are like, "I can't break out of this relationship. I can't break out of this toxic cycle." You absolutely can. You absolutely can. The problem is that you absolutely 100% have to do a self audit.
Mm-hmm.
You have to look internally first and say, "Holy shit, I'm a hot dumpster fire. And how am I going to put it out? How am I going to fix this? How am I going to course correct?
Mm-hmm.
What can I do to make life better?" And a lot of women, I'm not going to say that they're not strong enough, because every woman is strong enough, right? They're strong in their own sense. They're strong in their own right. But sometimes they don't want to course correct because they've lived in that gutter for so long, or they've lived in the darkness for so long that they don't know how to come out of it.
The pattern is more comfortable.
The pattern is more comfortable. Yes. It's like your favorite pair of like black yoga pants that have the hole right in the butt and the stitching's coming apart at the seams.
Yeah.
But you wear them every day because they're comfortable. They've stretched just exactly the way you need them to. And, but sometimes you have to buy new yoga pants. Sometimes you have to get out of your comfort zone and say, "Hey man, look, I gotta fix this. You gotta break the cycle of trauma with your kids." Because if we don't, we're gonna end up raising more boys and girls who are toxic to themselves and to each other.
Yeah.
And it's because it's a learned behavior.
Yes.
It's not necessarily because they've developed that out of survival.
Yes.
It's now a learned behavior. And I've got some of that from probably a lot, from my caregivers that have sort of just passed on their traits to me. And it's not my cross to bear. The thing didn't happen to me.
Right.
And now I am reacting in my relationship or throughout my life like that.
Right.
And I don't know if that's harder to break.
I think it is harder to break, but something as you were talking just came to me. It's like a family recipe, right? You've got this family recipe that has no taste. It has no oomph to it. You change the recipe. You add some spices. You add an ingredient. You take away an ingredient, right? So think of your trauma. You know what? Think of your trauma as a family recipe. You want it to taste better for your kids. You want it to be better for your kids.
Right.
So instead of it being bland or this ingredient that your kid might be allergic to or anything, you take out what's unnecessary and you make it better.
Yep.
Right? Think of it that way. And that, as you were talking, I was like, huh.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's a family
love that
recipe.
That is an awesome point to end on, Ellie. Awesome point.
you.
I mean, if you are interested in a part 2, I think the 3 of us could talk further, because I mean, I wrote down like a bunch of questions that I had for you. And Sherry did too. Yeah. While you were talking, and there was just so much good stuff that we didn't get to it. So if you want to come back, we'd love to have you back on the show. We
Absolutely.
really, I mean, would be awesome. And then if there's, I mean, how do you feel about if somebody's out there that maybe, you know, really connected with you, like Sherry said she did? How do you feel about somebody maybe reaching out to just kind of connect with you further because they feel compelled to do so?
I am 100% okay with that. I think I shared my blog with you, mywildgrace.blogspot.com. So if they want to read about it, they can relate to the things that I've been through. I'm not going to say it didn't cause any family drama. It caused a lot of family drama on my side, but they can reach out to me. You know, they can email me, underground Alle, ALLE @gmail.com. They can, you know, shoot me a message on Facebook. I'm on, you know, MOMnation. I'm a watcher. I watch everybody, and I just kind of like statuses and love statuses. It's just weird like that. But yes, I don't mind, you know, sharing, because in sharing I learn, right?
Yep. Totally agree.
You know, somebody might be like, hey, my grandmother told me one time, like, you know, never kiss in the rain, or this, that, and the other. And I'm like, huh, all right. I learn, and I don't mind sharing that at all. But yes, I'd love to do a part 2 if you guys, you know.
Absolutely. We'll get you on so that you can come back and I'll save my notes for them.
Okay.
All right, everybody. If you are interested in being a guest on the show, please follow us. We are at MOMnation USA. We are on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We are on YouTube. Give us a like and a follow. Send us a message. Let us know why you would like to be on the show. Also, if you are listening to just the audio version of this on your favorite podcast platform, remember, we are MOMnation Talk Radio. We have a lot of different shows that go through this channel. Give us a like and a follow and a download, maybe a rating. That would be really helpful. So we can get this awesome information out to the moms that really need to hear it. And we know, the 3 of us here know, there's a lot of moms that need to hear this conversation. So
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Alle. And of course, as always, Sherry, lovely to see you, my dear. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.